I can talk about it.
Oh, exactly.
So I can
Okay,
feel my glasses.
I think we're all ready to begin. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This is our webinar, Safe Tech for Kids, What to Do About Children's Increased Use of Technology During COVID-19, Our Shelter in Place, and Schooling from Home. Thank you for joining us. My name is Nicole Warwick. I'm an educational psychologist, an environmental health advocate, and the co-founding executive director of FACTS, Families Advocating for Chemical and Toxic Safety. I'm delighted to be your host and weaver of content for today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you by FACTS and the Environmental Health Trust. We would like to express our gratitude to our funder, the Jonas Fund for Children's Environmental Health, for supporting this webinar and our work. Before we begin, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. This is a Zoom webinar format, so we cannot see any of you, our wonderful participants, but we thank you for being here. You are all muted, so we cannot hear you either. However, you can communicate with us using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. Just click on that box and enter any questions that you might have for us, and I will be sure to queue those up for our speakers today. The content for this discussion is really going to come from you, our participants, so we need your participation and your questions. Any question is welcome. We will do your best to answer all questions that are provided. We are recording this session and simultaneously live streaming via FACTS Facebook page. We invite you to share the link with your family or to create a Facebook watch party. If you registered for this via Zoom, we have your email and we'll send you follow-up materials with a link to this video recording, as well as any resources shared by our panelists. If you didn't register and you are watching via Facebook Live, we will make these resources available to you via our Facebook page as well. You can also find them at our website, factstooaction.org. All right, well, with the COVID-19 shelter in place, children are now learning from home and are spending a lot more time using technology. Over 1.5 billion children globally are out of school due to COVID-19. And many families are turning to online education technology. I think actually all of us are relying on online technology to communicate with our families, to get our work done, and to kind of create a sense of normalcy, if we can, during this time. During this webinar, we'll discuss the health risks associated with children's increased use of technology and share with you simple things that you can do to reduce these risks, to create healthy boundaries around screen time, and to promote safer use of technology for your family. I feel tremendously grateful to engage in conversation with our panelists today. These are eminent women in the fields of environmental medicine, EMF science, school-based social work, special education, and parent advocacy. I'd like to introduce you to our panel speakers, Dr. Cindy Russell, Theodora Scorado, Landry Purcell, and our communications coordinator, Adrian Saslow. Thank you all for joining us today. I am your host, Nicole Warwick, and I am honored to be able to introduce these panelists. First up, to kind of ground us in, like, what is the science? Why should we care about this? What are the health impacts and risks associated with increased tech use? I'd like to introduce Cindy Russell. Dr. Cindy Russell is the Executive Director of Physicians for Safe Technology, a nonprofit group formed to educate physicians and the public about the science, the risks, and the safer use of wireless technology. After completing training at Stanford University in plastic surgery, Dr. Russell started practice in Mountain View, California. She has studied toxins in the environment as chair of the Santa Clara County Medical Association Environmental Health Committee for more than 20 years. During that time, she's authored many policy resolutions related to reducing environmental toxins at the California Medical Association House of Delegates. In 2001, She led the effort to pass the Santa Clara County Integrated Pest Management Ordinance to reduce pesticide exposure on county property. Her focus continues to be disease prevention and environmental health through toxics reduction. It is a great honor to have you with us today, Dr. Russell. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole, and Theodora and Lendry also to give me this opportunity to speak to you today about wireless impacts on our health and how kids can sort of navigate through this in a healthier manner. And as mentioned, after I trained at Stanford, and also I just want to say this is a lot of information I'm going to be giving you. This could be a whole weekend talk. In fact, they have had weekend talks on just health effects of wireless radiation. But I'm going to give you as much information as I can this short period, and I will answer questions afterwards. And you can go to our website also for more information. After I trained at Stanford, as mentioned, I became interested in toxins, working through our local county medical association, and authored various policies on toxins and learned about this. And as I was learning about persistent toxins in the environment and those in Silicon Valley and beyond, I also witnessed the epidemic of breast cancer in younger and younger women. And I'm a breast reconstructive surgeon. So then I began to connect the dots between toxic exposures and health. And I'm going to go ahead and screen share now. I'm sorry, I need to share this. Sorry here, and I'm going to, sorry. So I began to, I witnessed this epidemic of breast cancer, and then I began to connect the dots between these toxic exposures and health impacts. But I didn't really know anything about wireless technology at all until there was a proposal to put a cell tower on my daughter's school about 10 years ago. And I didn't know anything about it. We had wireless internet. We had our cordless phones. I had no clue that there was any problem. But there were several parents that were concerned. And so we began to research this and have meetings. And we found evidence that cell towers cause health effects. If people live near them, they developed headaches, insomnia, fatigue, depression, anxiety, heart palpitations. If they live near a cell tower. And there are about 8 of these 10 studies that showed effects within about 1,500 feet. And when cell towers were removed, the symptoms were basically almost all disappeared. So we were concerned. We went to the school board, we went to the meetings, we tried to convince them that there were potential health effects, and this wasn't really a good idea for our kids who were developing. And the school board ultimately decided not to pass the cell tower, the proposal for the cell tower, but mostly because there were parents there who gave quite a bit of money to the foundation, the school foundation. They said, you might get $1,200 a month to rent this, but you're really going to lose money in the long run because we're not going to be able to fund you anymore. And that's really why the cell tower was not ultimately passed, one of the reasons. But this led to my research into health effects, and I began to wonder about it, just like I wondered about all the other toxins in the environment. So what I found was that radio frequencies are a biologic and an environmental toxin. They're silent, you can't feel it, you can't hear it, you can't see it, similar to chemicals. And there's damage on a basic cellular level. It affects all living organisms, and it's cumulative. You can have, we know cancer takes decades, and not just one hit, but several hits in order to cause cancer or other chronic illnesses. And like chemicals, this wireless technology and its infrastructure was introduced and commercialized without adequate testing. A lot of people say there's no mechanism of action. However, now we know that there is a mechanism. It's very similar to toxins, chemical toxins, and it's called oxidation. And oxidation basically is the creation of free radicals that damages macromolecules such as DNA and proteins and lipids in our cells, similar to chemicals again. And this oxidation, if we look at it, if you look at bleach oxidizes, and rust is an oxidizing kind of a reaction. But this oxidative damage was seen in studies of microwave radiation in all of these kinds of cells, in sperm and ovaries, nerve cells, cardiac cells, blood cells, and immune cells. And they know that this effect existed because when they gave antioxidants, it reversed or prevented these effects, as they did with chemical toxins. And it's very well established in the medical literature that oxidative stress from any sort, be it chemical or even psychological stress, can cause inflammation, and that can lead to human disease. And studies have shown that wireless radiation can cause oxidative stress and association with these different kinds of diseases. I'm showing the studies there in cancer, reproductive harm, neurologic disease, Alzheimer's, cardiac disease, and immune suppression. So what do we know about wireless radiation? So we do know that it passes through our bodies, and the wider, the longer the radiation, the deeper it's absorbed. It's absorbed by anything containing water, and that is most living organisms, including ourselves. And we know now it harms cellular processes, not via heat. And it's a mix of artificial electromagnetic frequencies. So we don't just get one frequency, say a Wi-Fi, we get other GPS, and we have Bluetooth. We have several frequencies and lower frequencies and magnetic fields that we get exposed to that can all have an adverse effect. And we are electrical beings. We all know our brain, our heart, our nervous system all works through very minute electrical signaling. And that goes for all organisms, really minute signaling. So it makes sense that we would be affected by this kind of radiation. I'm going to go through a few studies. Let's look at the brain. Well, when I first looked at this, I didn't know anybody who had electrosensitivity, but I read the studies and I knew about these studies on cell towers. But some of the studies showed that they couldn't reproduce these studies on people who thought that they reported they had electrosensitivity symptoms, and this was basically all in their head. It was psychiatric. But there were some studies that showed it, but others didn't, and it was sort of conflicting. And then I met Dr. Scott Eberly, and he's on our advisory board. He's a hospice physician in Petaluma, a wonderful person. And he wrote this wonderful article called "What's a Diagnosis, Doctor?" And this really documents his journey through his development of electrosensitivity from initially a carbon monoxide poisoning in his house. And after that, he became really sensitive to cell phones and laptops and even cell towers that were close. He thought he was crazy. He's like, I don't know what's going on. He read about this issue. He had his friends come over and blind him and say, is it on or is it off? And realized, yes, indeed, he was electrosensitive. I think everyone should read this article. If they are not familiar with electrosensitivity, you can find it on our website. And we had this published in the County Medical Association journal as well. And he really documents the psychological effects of it, not only the physical effects that he had, which are all on the left, but the psychological effects. And you almost have like a PTSD from this. So he also wrote an article called An Underworld Journey, which you can find in Ecopsychology. So I highly recommend you read this or pass it on to people who don't understand it. He's an excellent writer. There are published studies on hypersensitivity, certainly. And Bevington in 2019 did sort of a review of reviews of all of these and found that these symptoms are found in up to 30% of people who have mild symptoms. About 1.5 to 5% of people have moderate EHS, and about 0.65% have restricted access to work. You're never going to see them because they're going to stay at home, or they're out in a rural area where there's no cell towers, because they can't be near a cell phone. They can't be near a tower or even a Wi-Fi router. They can't work. And that he estimated to be 435,000 people in the UK and about 2 million people in the United States. So if we look at the basic science literature, which you can find on our website and other sites, we see that this is a neurotoxin. There is loss of brain cells in the hippocampus, and that's really important because that's our memory center. And there are several studies showing this. Demyelination of nerve cells, a decrease in neurotransmitter levels, disruption of the blood-brain barrier, and DNA damage to nerve cells, which of course could set us up for brain tumors. We know that children are more vulnerable. Their skulls are thinner. They have a higher content of water in the brain. They absorb 2 to 5 times more radiation, and their organ systems aren't developed. And this study by Fernandez and also Deborah Davis of Environmental Health Trust shows this absorption. It's a really good example, looking at VR, virtual reality, that people are using on their faces and near their eyes, and also cell phones on their ears, and how far this goes into the brain. So we need to be cautious about it. It is really radiation, and it is absorbed. So let's look at another study on humans, and let's see what's happened here. So Mayo did this wonderful study. It's a prospective study over 2 years, and he looked at 2 schools. Each had a cell tower. One cell tower was emitting lower than the other. One was at 2 microwatts per centimeter squared. You won't understand that too much, but the other was 5 times higher at 10 microwatts per centimeter squared. Keep in mind, the current limit's about 1,000 microwatts per centimeter squared. And he did neuropsychological testing, and all this is standard testing. He accounted for confounding factors. And his result was that the teens at the school with the higher emissions had significantly lower cognitive scores, delayed fine and gross motor skills, spatial working, memory was lower. And this was just really a well-done study in indicating it. One thing you might know is that Russia, their standards are lower, and their standards are 10 microwatts per centimeter squared after they did their studies. So what about risk to reproduction? There are many studies. We have about 54 studies on our website under scientific literature that shows damage to sperm, including structural alteration, decreased motility, DNA damage, and lower testosterone. There's also studies showing ovarian damage and embryo damage. But an interesting study by Dr. Di-Kun Lee of Kaiser showed an association with miscarriage. And this study was a really well done study. He showed that wireless devices and all this electromagnetic radiation that we're exposed to triples the miscarriage rate. And he took 913 pregnant women. He put exposometers on them, and they're just small radio frequency monitors, and it shows the radiation levels. And he said, just average day, just don't do anything special, average everyday environment around. And he controlled for other factors. And he found, again, with the highest tier of exposure, a 3-fold increase in miscarriage. And this study was really important because it was really well done. And I've spoke with Dr. Lee before, and he's concerned that the studies are not, there's all these confounding factors. He did an amazing job, such that it was in every newspaper, and no one has discredited him. No one has challenged his findings, which is really unusual because they challenge everybody's findings. And this was really noteworthy. It was in Reuters, and even friends of mine who said, Cindy, you're kind of crazy. You really think this is harmful? They all said, Cindy, hey, look at this study. Did you see it? I said, yeah. They said, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. What about cancer? Radio frequency radiation now is considered a class 2B carcinogen, possible carcinogen, by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And several scientists are asking for this to be elevated to a class 1 known carcinogen because of the increase in studies showing an association with cancer and DNA damage and so forth. Well, what do we know about brain cancer and cell phones? Hardell and Carlberg have done probably a great service to us in all of their research that has shown a significant association with brain tumors and cell and cordless phone use on the same side of the head after about 1,680 hours. And they have several studies that have shown associations and about a 4-fold increase in kids who start using cell phones before the age of 30. It's really well done studies. They're blinded. They're really flawless research. We know now that brain tumor rates are rising in England and France, and that's been a big argument. People say, well, there's no increase in brain tumors, so there can't be an effect. We know that most common cancer in youth from 0 to 19 is brain cancer, and it's rising. And the thing about industry-funded studies is that they are flawed. They're not all blinded. And the first case, there's about 13 cases of cell phone court cases in the United States, but the first case to win around the world was in Italy, when a gentleman said, I think this cell phone I was required to use for hours a day on the phone at work caused my brain cancer. And he won because the Italian judge threw out all of the industry-funded studies after looking at them and saying, yeah, indeed, they're flawed. So another major study that is from the National Toxicology Program in 2018, this is a study on cell phones and cancer. It was only 10 years old, only $30 million. It was one of the best studies ever done. And they found a significant association with cancer of the heart, the brain, adrenal medulla, and the prostate. And they found another interesting finding, and that is cardiomyopathy, or aging of the heart, which is consistent with the oxidative effects. If you can understand the radiation passes through you and causes oxidation of those cells, it would be totally consistent. And they were really surprised to find that out, have that result. We know the FCC standards are outdated. They're based on a short-term heating, not on long-term biological effects. It's essentially a cooking standard. They don't consider vulnerable populations, the fetus, babies, elderly, chronic, those who have chronic illness. They don't consider those who have electrosensitivity, and they don't consider the science on non-thermal biological effects at low levels. The Bioinitiative report came out in 2007, and they are asking for biologically based exposure limits, exactly what we're talking about. Take a look at the science on the biology of this, and not just those on thermal, and let's reevaluate those standards and recommend a precautionary level, because we are getting exposed to these at environmentally relevant levels, which are everyday levels we saw in Dr. Lee's study, that are causing harm. So these FCC standards need reevaluation. The American Academy of Pediatrics has called for this, the Austrian Medical Association, the California Medical Association, and the Government Accountability Office also. The California Department of Public Health issued guidelines in 2017 to reduce your exposure because the science has shown harm. So the Austrian Medical Association 2012 was the first to come out with these recommendations and guidelines, and saying, you know what, we think that there is an association with radiofrequency radiation, what they called electrosmog, and these unusual symptoms, neurobehavioral symptoms. And so they issued these guidelines, and they have the strictest limits in the world now. The American Academy of Pediatrics in 2013 wrote a letter to the Federal Communications Commission asking for reevaluation of standards to protect children's health and well-being, to reflect current use patterns, and provide meaningful consumer disclosure. The California Medical Association, they issued a resolution in 2014 that supports efforts to implement new safety standard limits for wireless devices to levels that don't cause harm to the environment or to humans based on scientific research that includes biological harm, not just thermal effects. In 2016, a wonderful report, sort of a white paper compendium from the European Academy of Environmental Medicine, is a guideline for the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of EMF-related problems and illness. And there is so much information here. You can find this on our website, but it's just a wealth of information on electrosensitivity. And they define electrosensitivity as an environmental illness, similar to chemical sensitivity, which is also environmental illness. The treatment's based basically on reduction of EMF exposure at home and also in public spaces. And they noted that in 2008, Swiss Society of Doctors for the Environment, they have a clinic that diagnoses EMR-related disease. We don't have any such clinic here. We need that. I'm just going to give you a few safety tips. I know others are going to discuss this. You can go on our website at mdsafetech.org and under safety tips, under review of topics, and it will give you a whole list of these. We also have them in Spanish. You basically want to wire everything you can wire, and I know Theodora is going to talk about it. Time matters. You want to, if you're on the cell phone, keep it short. Distance matters. Keep the phone away from you. Don't sleep with the phone near your head. You want to turn your wireless devices off at night, and also keep your landline if you have. If you're lucky enough to have it, keep it, and remove your smart meter. Lamech did a study, the only study on smart meters so far that I could find, and this showed significant increase in symptoms of electrohypersensitivity once the smart meters were installed. It goes through your house. It's an interesting kind of a phenomenon. So these are a few articles that I've written, especially want to highlight Wireless Silent Spring that discusses the environmental impacts. And this parallels Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and has a lot of links to environmental articles, and also 5G wireless telecommunications expansion, public health, and environmental implications. And if you need a copy of it, I'm happy to provide that. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak. Just reduce your exposure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. We had a question come in for you from Janet Fitzgerald. She wonders, how can we as patients get our doctors to hear us and get involved themselves? Which department or doctors are our best advocates?
Well, I think if you're, internal medicine doctors, there are some internal medicine doctors and family practitioners that understand it. If you have somebody that's an integrated medical physician, they tend to understand this a little bit more. I think there's just been a lot of distrust and just misinformation with regards to the medical community really accepting this to a large degree. And we have a site called Up to Date. If you want to know what the margins to take on a melanoma are, you can go to Up to Date. It has a lot of information on all sorts of things for medical doctors. But when I went to their site to look at electrosensitivity, they said it's all hogwash and it's all psychiatric. And that is a real problem. It's hugely influential to physicians. And I found it really problematic that they didn't really look at the science of it. So I think there are physicians that you can go to if you have electrosensitivity and you need a diagnosis or as a disability. But I think it's always just good to mention it to your physician if you can, and bring it up, because a lot of them are not aware. And you say, just read the literature, and I think it's something that is becoming more accepted as there are more talks on this to physician groups and for CME, say continuing medical education. And I think that's the way to educate doctors, is for more of the doctors who are involved in this to give talks and to really have people understand the full range of mechanism and biological effects. So it's a good question. Thank you. I can't hear right now. Can I hear?
Thank you. There we are. Thank you
Okay.
for the reminder to unmute myself.
That's
good.
okay.
I want to thank you for that informative presentation on that. I'm sitting with the weight of the medical information, and I'm really curious, like, what can we do about this? And so I'd like to pose a question to Theodora and introduce her to you all. Theodora Scurato is the Executive Director of the Environmental Health Trust, a scientific think tank that publishes research and educates policymakers and the public on environmental health issues. Environmental Health Trust scientists are some of the leading independent voices calling for action on improved safety standards on cell phones and wireless technology. Theodora has trained teachers' unions and presented on policy of electromagnetic fields at the New Hampshire State 5G Commission, National Institute of Health, Tel Aviv University, and the University of California, San Francisco. She coordinates scientific programs in the United States and internationally with Environmental Health Trust senior science advisors. She's also a lead policy analyst and researcher for the Environmental Health Trust database of international policy actions on cell phones and wireless technology. She helped coordinate the first U.S. medical conference designed exclusively to train medical and health professionals on electromagnetic radiation, and has published on research, policy, and legal issues related to electromagnetic radiation. She is a clinical social worker, and previous to working in environmental health, directed an intensive therapy program in Montgomery County Schools special education programs, and worked at an ADHD clinic. So she has a wealth of wisdom to share with us today. And I'm curious, Theodora, what can we do about this?
Well, there is so much that we can do. I know when I first learned about this and started talking to people, they were like, what? It's everywhere. There's nothing we can do. And I got really involved, and that's how I got so involved in the policy, because I was like, wait a minute, we've been down this road before with asbestos and lead, and we're still dealing with, right? But I was so impressed to learn that in other countries, they are doing something. So I wanted to share a little of what's happening around the world and also what's happening here in the United States. And I'm gonna share my screen. I'll say that there are over, sorry about that.
It's fine.
Make this up. There are over 20 countries that have policies in place recommending that we reduce radiation exposure, reduce cell phone radiation exposure. And I wanted to share with you, actually, let me go to this, I apologize. There we go, okay. What's happening, for example, in Cyprus. So let me, everyone's face is here, and I need to move everyone just to get this up, so I apologize. This is the back of the bus in Cyprus, and I have on one side a picture of the bus, and the other side is the translation. Don't irradiate me, learn how to protect me. The radiation is possibly carcinogenic. And they actually have a large-scale public information campaign going on. So what's the first thing that needs to happen is raising awareness and people knowing that this is actually something to be concerned about. And how do we reduce exposure, of which the Cyprus Children's Health Committee on Environment and Children's Health has developed an entire campaign. They've had it for years. They have videos, informational commercials that happen for pregnant women, for teenagers, and for parents. Belgium has banned the sale of mobile phones designed for children, as has France. There are, in fact, laws all over the world. France doesn't allow advertisements selling cell phones. They need to show the phone away from the head. In addition, French Polynesia has an educational campaign. We have all of this on our website, and I find it absolutely so interesting to see what other countries are doing. They have little videos, PSAs that have been made by French Polynesia, by Croatia, explaining to people, don't put the phone to your head, protect your children. Here's what emits this kind of radiation. If you look at Wi-Fi, this is an image from a news story at St. Augustine School in Italy several years ago, where they had this ceremony where they removed the Wi-Fi router. And here are all the parents, and they're celebrating this moment for their children's health. And we link to that news story on our site as well. In fact, there are several countries addressing the school issue, which is what concerned me, having kids, and also as a social worker who worked in school with special ed, working with kids who had prenatal exposure to drugs. I had a lot of children who had that history. And when I learned about the impact to the brain, that is what had me dive into this issue, because when I started reading about damage to memory and cognition, I was like, oh no, this is really important. So again, Belgium, France, Israel, Cyprus, and French Polynesia all ban Wi-Fi in nursery school. And then Cyprus has a directorate to remove it from all elementary schools. France, they actually have the Wi-Fi off. It's the default setting, and it only goes on if a teacher's using it at that time, and they're very aware of it there. So there's actually a lot of teachers, who want to use alternative ways to connect, and all the teachers have wired technology rather than there being Wi-Fi on all the time. And Israel has restrictions as well. In the United States, Oregon last year passed a law that was forming and calling on the health authority to do an investigation of the health effects of wireless, with a focus on children in school. And also they specifically say, like Dr. Russell was talking about, that it needs to be the independent science, because this issue, like tobacco, is just filled with industry influence, undue industry influence. If you read and dig in, there's a Harvard report from 2015 that goes into that. We have pages on our website at EH Trust on that as well. So just to give you just a sampling of this, the United Educators of San Francisco passed a resolution on safer technology. They're asking for the California Department of Health advisory on cell phone radiation to be posted in the classrooms, to be disseminated among staff, parents, and kids. And the Los Angeles School District has long prohibited school cell towers. There are many school districts that have these best practices with devices. And often that came about because of parents like me, like you, who've been advocating for safer technology. Now, unfortunately, these best practices are not protective, but they're a step. They're a step in the right direction, and they're critically important. So, for example, keeping the device off the lap, because the closer you are, the more radiation you're going to absorb. I know in Ashland and Onteora, New York, Ashland, Massachusetts, they actually have best practices which say, turn the Wi-Fi off when not in use. Keep it at a distance, and it's posted in every classroom. In Maryland, the Children's Environmental Health and Protection Advisory Council issued recommendations to reduce wireless radiation in school. That's the first state body to talk about wireless in school. The New Jersey Education Association has recommendations on how to reduce wireless, like hardwiring the printers, the boards, all of these hardwares, peripherals that we have in the school. And then there's resolutions by teachers, like the New York State Teachers Union. They have a resolution on the hazards of wireless, and they have developed best practices with Grassroots Environmental Education, another organization doing incredible work on this. And there's a webinar online, and as well, San Francisco United Educators has a series of webinars that I did along with Dr. Russell, where they were educating teachers and staff on this. And one of the things I want to just let you know about, if you're a teacher or if you want to teach on this, the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Association has developed, and we supported that, educational curriculum on cell phones and wireless for the classroom. And this was a graphic we put together, which is a little overwhelming, but just to talk about what's happened, because 20 years ago, 10 years ago, this was not the case, right? Is that what emits wireless? Well, now we have all of these devices in our homes. Smart TVs, wireless headphones, a cell phone, tablet, cordless phones, Wi-Fi router, laptop, wireless mouse, gaming systems, MP3 players. Like, we have iPods, but they're all the older version. And the newer ones, are wireless, wireless printers. So how do we, one thing that once you know information and you have information about what emits wireless, then you can take steps to reduce it. But you have to know certain things, like first, what in your house has it? Also, that it's a two-way nonstop communication between the device and the base station, and it's happening all the time. Back and forth, even when you're not using it. So I just wanted to show this graphic to show you have your router that might connect to your laptop and the virtual speaker and all the things that connect to the router. Then you might have a cordless home base station that connects to the handset. You might have a baby monitor. Those two things were always connecting. Gaming consoles. Then you have your phone that's connected to the cell tower that's also connected to the headset and all of the things that connect to your phone. So the best way to address those things is to swap them out with safer technology. And if you know that they're always radiating, the first step is just to turn them off and unplug them, especially when not in use. Like, as step one, that's what I did, is I was like, oh, okay, so I'll turn them off when not in use. Then I was able to take those next critical steps, which was to actually hardwire. So I have a picture. This is actually my computer. And I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's a wire going into it. It's an Ethernet that goes into an adapter. Most computers, if you want to hardwire your computer so you don't use Wi-Fi, they don't have an Ethernet port, not all of them anymore, so you need to get the correct adapter for your computer. And then the data goes to the wire, not through the air. You get Ethernet ports, get your correct adapter, and this can happen for a tablet as well as even a cell phone, although we recommend getting a corded phone. And then, just to give you a tip, just remember when you hardwire with Ethernet, that you turn it's more than a tip, it's an important piece, is that you turn the antennas off in the device itself. Because the device, even if you're hardwired, it's still going to be sending out Bluetooth, checking, like I showed you in that last picture. It's always checking with the base station. Hello, are you there? And then the base station, the router, the thing that it's connecting with is like, yes, I'm here. Just in case you need me, I'm here. They're going back and forth. So you want to turn that off. This is what I'm using right now, a corded mouse, corded headphones, corded keyboard, corded speakers, swapping that out, identifying what's in your home. That was my first step, was what do I have in my home, and what can I replace, and how do I reduce my exposure in situations where I don't have an option. And also setting up a corded phone like I have here. Even if you don't have a copper landline, there's a couple ways you can do that with voice over IP or an internet service. We pay through our provider to have a telephone, and that way I can make long calls. And it's really important to figure out how to get a corded phone in your home or through your internet. And I think that the most important thing is to share this information, to learn more, take steps so that you understand it and can, address your family, and then get really involved, because many hands make light work when it comes to this situation. And I just wanted to mention blue light. That's another kind of electromagnetic field, although we didn't talk about the health issues, the impacts to, and I know Dr. Russell could talk about that as well. But I do recommend getting a blue light blocker for your screens, considering blue light blocking glasses. Because my kids won't wear glasses, they're teenagers, I have screens that I have on top of all of the devices in our house. And also there's software that you can download, but from what I heard here, it's best to have a couple things going on, because some of those software programs might not address all the blue light. So I have 100% blue blocker. And of course, getting outside is one of the most important pieces. And this is our website, Environmental Health Trust. And I made a page, ehtrust.org/safe technology, and I'll put it in the chat later, where I have resources you can download on steps you can take to reduce exposure. And I know I put in the chat as well Dr. Russell's page on how to reduce exposure. There's Dr. Moskowitz at UC Berkeley, University of California. There's so many resources out there. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Theodora. I do have a couple questions for you. One, if I'm using an Ethernet cord, I notice when I go to purchase, there are different types of Ethernet cords. What would you recommend?
I recommend a shielded Ethernet cord, and Cat 7, so one that is shielded. Now there's also an issue of, there are electric fields, and we have on the page that I linked to, I have a page called Deep Dive, where if you're interested in kind of the next level of what to do, we have information on grounding the cord as well, but a shielded Ethernet. Oh, also to use when you charge your computer, like this is a Mac, it came with a 2-prong electric cord to plug into electricity to charge. But we recommend getting a 3-prong, which you can just buy. It's pretty inexpensive to have that, attach that to the charger to charge, to also ground the electrical cord.
Thank you for that. I'm very curious, because of your background as a social worker in special education and having worked with people with ADHD, I know a lot of parents are struggling with their kids at home and getting them to focus and get their tasks done. And I'm wondering, could the prevalence of increased technology affect those students who are already dealing with developmental disorders or things that complicate their learning, such as ADHD?
I would imagine it exacerbates any current mental health issue that would be. Absolutely. I mean, there's so much research on, well, it's all combined, right? There's a device It's got electromagnetic radiation. It's also an interactive screen, which overstimulates the brain and the nervous system. So, and yet when you put kids in front of devices, it's like they might be bouncing around and suddenly they're still, right? What's going on? There's dopamine hits that your child is getting. It's addictive, but try to take that screen away. Kids have tantrums. I think when we do the follow-up, we'll make sure to put those book recommendations of Dr. Dunkley's book and Dr. Cardaris's book on the impact of screens and devices. And I guess I should add this, Dr. Russell, I don't know if you mentioned the study that the replication study of children who use cell phones to their head that found damaged memory. There's a lot of studies that have looked at electromagnetic radiation and impacts and damaged memory. A study from Yale that found the mice had, if they could have ADHD, that's what they had, damaged memory and hyperactivity when there was prenatal exposure. And then the study by Dr. D. Kuhn Lean that was just published that showed connection to ADHD. So I think this is, the more I learned, the more I got more involved, and here I am.
We're so grateful for people like you who are willing to do the deep dive and sit with difficult information and then decide to act on it. So I'm tremendously grateful for the work that you do. I'm very curious to know, and this is a question asked by one of our participants as well, are there safety concerns with smart wearables like GPS watches, our Fitbits, iWatches, things like that?
Is that for me?
Anyone, jump on.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I would personally, knowing what I know about all the wireless radiation, would not ever wear a wearable. I have a dumb watch. It just has a little battery and wind up. These can, if you start looking at even the SAR rates of them, they can be a significant, they radiate when they're, even if the SAR rate's sort of low when they're not connecting, but they're connecting all the time, as Theodora mentions, you can have that wireless radiation penetrate not only your wrist, but think about your wrist is, you know, and other body parts. And I think long-term, because you wear it all the time, some people wear it to bed, they wear Fitbits. I think there's definitely a potential for harm. And I would not suggest that. And I know Deborah Davis and Theodora have talked a lot about even the wearables on babies now and the baby toys that they have, the wearables. I think that they're very dangerous. So they not only have the effect of wireless radiation that could be harmful, but they also have a disconnect between people. You know, it's like your baby, you put the monitor on so that you can tell if the baby has a wet diaper. And we're sort of becoming robots and detached, you know, in terms of human connection with other humans. So I think there's a harm to that, and relying on technology for all of our thought processes, you know. So I think it's harmful. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you.
We just don't have the studies, right? We don't know. We put them out there and then we wait and see. Mm-hmm. That's how we test it.
Thank you so much. I would like to invite in Lendry Purcell to discuss what she encountered with her family and measures that she has taken. Before, I'd like to introduce her. Lendry Purcell is a colleague of mine. She's also co-founder of FACTS. She is an educator, a philanthropist, a philanthropic consultant, and a children's rights and environmental health advocate. Her advocacy work began many years ago as a teacher for Teach for America in Oakland, where she created reforms in schools for children with special needs. She's worked as a case manager, a community schools coordinator, and a program officer for Price Charities. At the same time, she spearheaded the Jonas Youth Development Initiative that dispersed close to $3 million to support mentoring, school-to-career training programs, and mental health support for at-risk youth in San Francisco's East Bay. In response to learning that her baby had an elevated lead level, she embarked on a quest to find the source of that exposure. And during that process, uncovered numerous common toxic chemicals in her home things that are in all of our homes, and went on to spearhead the Jonas Philanthropies Children's Environmental Health Initiative. This program is instrumental in the work of children's environmental health in our country. They provide funding and toxics education for medical providers, consumers, parents, policymakers, and retailers. As an advisory board member to the Jonas Center for Nursing Excellence, Lendry informs the research topics of the center's PhD and Doctor of Nurse Practitioner nurse scholars. She has recently spearheaded the environmental health, school nursing, and complementary medicine scholar cohorts. She is one of those people who did the deep dive, sat with the research, and said, this is unacceptable, we must do something about it. It's a tremendous honor to work with her and to have her here with us today. Lendry, I'm curious, can you tell us how you learned about this and what made you decide to take this on as a parent advocate?
Sure. First, sorry if you hear background kid noises. I'm encouraging my husband to take the kids outside right now. I had been an environmental health funder for about 10 years, and my focus was on heavy metals and pesticides. And my son was entering kindergarten, and it came to my attention that our school district had used some sort of school upgrade technology bond to purchase a Chromebook for every child in our district starting in kindergarten. And that was interesting to me. I didn't really think about kindergartners needing Chromebooks, and I called the district, and I found out there was an intention to move our school textbooks online, and it was a cost-saving measure. And I just started reading the fine print in the manuals, and I learned about, all these health and safety concerns that are just right in the manual, like you shouldn't have these things on children's laps. And the teachers didn't know. And of course, she went into a classroom and kids were sitting in circles with the, actually it was Chromebooks, it was iPads, and then it was Chromebooks. But I work with a group of parents. First, I tried to get the district to think about, to look at the fine print and to talk about the safety concerns. I was working with a group of parents. We were trying to bring it to attention to teachers. And honestly, a bunch of parents just left our school district and went on to Montessori schools or Waldorf schools because they didn't want to deal with the mandatory use of screens. I also know screens are really addictive. And I've seen with my own children that I'd like to control how much use they have. And that was an issue for me. I hadn't really thought about the wireless issue until I was at an environmental working group funders dinner in LA, and I was sitting with one of their top children's environmental health scientists who works in DC, and I said, what do you think about wireless technology and the safety to children? She said, I'm more concerned about that than most of the chemicals that we're working on. I was like, wow, can you please send me some of the alarming studies? And she did. And the more I read, the more I realized that it feels like what's happening in the wireless world is the same as what I learned is happening in the chemical world, which is we have 85,000 untested chemicals in common use. And how things work is you put something on the market and then you wait and see what the impacts are. And that's not a very proactive safety approach. And so, that's how I got involved. Sorry.
No, thank you. That's so important for us to be able to ground this and like, how is this impacting us? And so I'm really curious, like what's happening now for your family with the schooling from home and the shelter in place? I know many school districts are transitioning to online education platforms and are actually providing all of their students with Chromebooks or iPads, and even going so far as to pay for hotspots for families and communities that don't have good wireless. So what are you noticing in your family?
Well, so it's so tricky because there's an equity issue, right? And so you need to make sure that all children have access, but we need to make sure it's safe access. And my bias is less screens. What I'm noticing in my home with my 10-year-old is that the more Zoom classrooms that we do and Seesaw and IXL, there's like 10 programs and platforms, the more distracting it is and the harder it is harder it is for him to just sort of focus. I'm kind of going back to packets, old school style, and my husband's a math teacher, and he sits down with my son and he just gives them pages to do, and they do it together. And for us, that's better than the alternative Khan Academy assignments, but every kid is different. And I guess that's what I wanted to say. The educator in me really feels like you have to know your kid and what works for your kid, and you have to feel really empowered to advocate. And that's sort of what I've done with our school, is I've said, you know, this isn't really working. I'm going to do this much online, and I'm going to do it how we need to do it. And the school, I'm finding the schools are really open now. And my children's school knows about the wireless safety issue. I've made that clear. And I've taken steps to make my home a really safe space in terms of Wi-Fi. I could talk about that too.
I'd love to know what you've done in your home to be able to reduce
Sure.
Wi-Fi. Thank you.
So first of all, it's scary to hear all this, right? COVID's scary. This is scary to hear. Once I learned what I learned, I had realized that my kid's pack and play sat right in front of our modem, and I had a wireless baby monitor, and I still have guilt about that. And I guess you have to kind of let the guilt go and let the fear go, and just try to do little by little things that you can do. First thing I did was to learn how to turn off antennas on my phone when I'm not using it. Most people don't know that you have like 6 antennas on your phone that are all emitting, and you can selectively turn off location services. You can put airplane mode on when you don't need it. That's a really kind of easy and important thing to do, is to turn off the antennas when you don't need them. And don't have your cell phone by your bed at night. If you have a wireless router, move it as far away from your bed as you can. Turn it off at night. There's some low-tech, cheap things you can do. So we started with the low-tech, cheap things like that. Later, we hardwired our home. We have cable through a Roku 2, which you can hardwire. This thing was infinitely helpful. I actually hired a building biologist at one point to really check my home out. If you want to invest in that, you can. You can also buy one of these, or it's called an Acousticom 2. My understanding is it's the most effective and the cheapest sort of meter you can buy. There are lots of different meters, but you can get it on Amazon. And I just go around my home and I turn it on, and you can see it's green. It's green right now. I'm in a low EMF space. Sometimes you'll see a glitch of orange or something, and that might be the neighbor's smart meter. Oh, something is emitting. I got to figure it out. But for the most part, it gives you a sense of what's going on in your home, because you might find that your TV, has really high EMFs, and you can go in the internal settings and turn it off. Lots of things you can turn on and off if you know what's happening, but it's hard not to know what's happening. So that was sort of empowering. Anytime a new electrical thing comes into my home, I check it or I read about it. I train my kid to turn off various antennas if he's on an iPod, which I don't love, but you have to allow certain things. So that's kind of how I handle it. One thing at a time, I just took on to make a safer environment.
Thank you for sharing that with us. One question that came in from our participants is, how much safety is provided by putting an iPad on airplane mode? This person has a child who has to use the iPad for schoolwork. They're wanting to know, is that enough to just turn it onto airplane mode? And I open that to you or to any of our presenters.
Well, I guess I would start by saying, it would be enough, as ideally you'd also make sure that location services is off, the LAN services, because sometimes you can be on airplane mode and there's still one antenna that's on that's tracking the location of the device. So sometimes you have to turn off Wi-Fi, airplane mode, and LAN services off. And that would be great from an EMF standpoint. That's really safe. If your kid's on it all day, that brings up other issues about screen time and brain development and other issues. But I would consider that quite safe for my child. I probably wouldn't have them put it on their lap. Theodora or Cindy?
I was going to say that, so they're electromagnetic fields, non-ionizing electromagnetic fields, which is what we're talking about, not X-rays, not the atomic bomb kind of radiation. But there's actually a couple kinds. And so there's magnetic fields that are on any electronics. So you always want it on a table. And even if the Wi-Fi is off, and thanks for mentioning, it's so important to mention there's so many different antennas now. You need to go through, make sure that they're all turned off. And then when you turn it off and turn it back on, like the next day, check that those antennas are off, because sometimes they come back.
Mhm. Thank you. How far away from our bodies should we be keeping our devices? Like if a child needs to use the iPad or the Chromebook and they're putting it on a desk and they're working on it, what is a safe distance? And is there any way that a child can shield themselves from EMF while having to use technology?
Cindy or Theodora, do you want to?
I think, in terms of shielding, you try to reduce, if you look at the FCC website, it tells you that it should be about 20 centimeters away with the older iPads. I don't know about the newer ones, but the older ones. So you want to keep it about 8 inches away. And, I think you want to keep it a certain distance, maybe, I don't know, farther away from the head as well. I just, if you can wire it, I mean, the idea is to wire it and then turn it off. I think Theodora's I think she has some information on that, and there's some on our website, but I'm sure on her website. And just, well, I don't have a tablet. I don't have any kind of something like that, because I was afraid that my daughter would use it, or I would, and I have concerned about the radiation from it. But you can wire those. You can wire the cell phones. But I think just trying to download anything you can do first, download a movie, and then go ahead and watch it is the safest. And just watch the time, because it goes pretty quickly. And when you look at those studies of reproductive organs being harmed over time, it's really frightening. It really makes you want. And the only thing you can do is just to reduce your exposure. So that would be my advice. And do you have anything else, Theodora or Lindry?
I just think about it, how exposure is cumulative, right? And since it's everywhere, I figure if I can make my home kind of a safe temple, and next try to work on the school, which honestly hasn't been easy. And it's hard to be the parent who's sticking your neck out, and it's embarrassing for your kid. And luckily there is really good information. Environmental Health Trust has put out a great letter to a principal, to a school board, that you can use and kind of make your own, that has the latest science, that has the latest protections. There are toolkits out there, and there are parent groups you can join to get support. But knowing that your home is a pretty safe place is a great place to start. Also, just wanted to say, for people who might be struggling with the screen time in general, not just the wireless part of it, potentially you could ask your school for a 504 plan if your child is really struggling or has been struggling in school, or things just aren't working with the online schooling. I mean, we might have this in the fall, and you can ask your school to come up with some accommodations, and you can ask for work packets instead, or for project ideas. You don't just have to have your kid doing the online schooling if it's not working for them. And some parents are going to move to homeschooling, I think, in the fall, if the only option is computer-based schooling. And some parents might homeschool together in small groups, or education's going to look a lot different. And it's just important that we know our kids, and we know what they need, and we advocate strongly for what they need.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to point out to our attendees that in the chat box are links to various resources. I want to thank Theodora for posting it. There is a Wi-Fi school toolkit that you can access that'll give you some guidance on what to do to protect your family from wireless exposure.
I would like to make a comment if I could. Also, just related to school, there's a wonderful book called Screen Schooled by two teachers, veteran teachers, 30 years. And I think it's worthwhile for anybody who's an educator to look at that book, because it really documents the changes in kids over time once digital technology arrived on the scene. And it's not just the wireless, as Lendry points out, it's really the overuse of technology that has the addictive quality, effects on depression, and and also learning. Is it really as effective? So looking to schools, it is a campaign. I know Theodora's been working on it, but there really needs to be a campaign to really bring all of this information together that shows, are we really learning better with all this digital technology? Should we be reducing it, using it, but using it less and looking at books and paper for learning? So I would just recommend that.
Thank you. I'm looking at our questions here. I'm really curious, and I want to ask Adrienne Saslow. Adrienne works with us at FACS. She's our communications coordinator, so she does all things tech, and she's a mama of 2 little ones. So I'm really curious, how do you manage boundaries around tech use and modeling for your children?
It's funny that I do Facebook and things for a living, and I have figured out on my phone, there's under settings, digital well-being and parental controls. And so I've set a timer for Facebook, and it boots me off and it won't let me access it again after I've set for 30 minutes. So if I really need to check something for work, I got to go to my computer for it. And it has a really lovely how long I've been on different apps throughout the day. So I can be like, oh, I spent an hour and a half talking to my mother, or see whatever it is. But it also has cool things like bedtime mode. My phone goes to black and white grayscale at 8:40. You'd be like, no, Adrienne, you have to get off the phone now. Pinterest is not nearly as interesting looking in black and white. So that really helps me not be on the phone, especially if you're like, well, I'll save that Facebook time for later. So I'm just going to use a little bit right now and check it in to be done. And besides not having my phone in use all the time for the physical effects, it's really good to not have that going on for the mental effects. And even previous to this situation with health, I don't need to look at the news or the junk that comes through my phone that often. And so that's putting parental controls on myself has been really great. It makes it so I'm not using it all the time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm resonating with what you're saying. And as an educational psychologist, I'm well aware of how addictive technology can be and how it is designed to be addictive. As a mother of 2 young adults, I have navigated this increasing use of technology during their teen years and found it really difficult, even just to get them to put it on airplane mode or to not sleep with their telephones. And so I think that depending on where we're at in the spectrum of parenting and being models for the young people in our lives, there's a range, right? There are some people who the kids are all over the tech. They love it. They want it all the time. They can't get enough of it. And then there are some who, on the other spectrum could care less, would much rather do something different than be on a device. I do want to point out that the American Psychological Association has specific recommendations for the amount of time a child should be using technology. I think it's helpful to keep this in perspective, especially considering the amount of technology used for education at this time. It might be counterproductive to have your child be spending so much time online learning. For those under 18 months, the recommendation is to avoid screen-based media completely, aside from video chatting. The video chatting is okay for our little ones that age. For children 18 to 24 months, they're recommending that whenever a child is on a device, that the parent is right there with them, monitoring the amount of time that they're on the device, recommended at 20 minutes. For children ages 2 to 5, so that's most of our preschools, our toddlers, they're recommending 1 hour per day maximum of screen time. And then for children over age 5, to really work to establish clear and consistent limits, come up with agreements with your family, help your children to understand why it's important to not spend so much time on technology. And then, like Lendry mentioned, to teach them how to do the best practices when they are on their devices. our kids are so clever. They just pick it up and go to it so much faster than we can, I think. And so when we teach them the right ways to use their technology, it becomes safer and more accessible to them. I'm pulling up more questions here. From Martha Glazer, she says, hi, we've been making requests to local school districts to provide information and instructions about time limits and physical proximity limits that should be observed for students and families who feel they must use Wi-Fi technology at this time. How can we convey this on a mass level to tech consumer families? And I open that to the panel.
Theodora, what would you say?
I think that every opportunity, I mean, there's a lot of levels to do this at a mass scale. Certainly, gosh, I mean, right now our federal government is not going to do it. The California Department of Health put out the advisory on how to reduce cell phone radiation. The American Academy of Pediatrics has recommendations like what was just said, you know, download it first, then turn off the wireless, and then use a device. So I think that, you know, speaking out, I mean, as a parent, speaking out every time I can, every city council meeting, every public meeting, talking about this issue, having film events to present the issue. We have recommended films on EMF. There's Generation Zapped, which is a documentary. Bert Wolf, which was on PBS, has a great series that you can show in your school. And I really recommend the Bert Wolf 2 pieces. They're absolutely incredible. They're fun. They're interesting. Or Generation Zap, to have a screening and have a dialogue, a conversation on this issue. We do need a mass scale action on this. The problem is that there's so much, so much industry influence saying it's not true. But the science is the science. I mean, if you actually look at the published research, you'll see study after study. Like Dr. Russell, I know you could talk and have. I've heard your presentations where it goes on, right? It's like, you know, as I've never heard of a drug with this many side effects or studies showing a harm. Would you really want to give it to your child? I mean, that's the thing. It's like, at what point do we, at what point does the federal government take action? They're saying it's not proven, it's not established. But the groups that are establishing it are industry loyal, industry connected, and scientists have even published on that, saying there's these conflicts of interest.
It's kind of like, makes me think of big tobacco, and it really is the same playbook. And what got me was the Harvard Ethics Review paper titled Captured Agency. I think it has to do with how the FCC, which is supposed to regulate EMFs, is run by industry lobbyists, former industry lobbyists. And the FCC then says that it's not a health and safety body. And so what I've discovered as a funder is that there aren't that many scientists looking at radiation anymore. After the Cold War, a lot of that science, the funding for that sort of dried up. So what we can do, there are lists of groups in almost every state working on EMF safety issues in schools, 5G, cell phones. And so we will make sure we have a link to different groups that you can join in your areas if that's something that you have some time to do. Mm-hmm. I think at first I was really shy about speaking out about this stuff, particularly at city council meetings, school board meetings. And I started posting the science on Nextdoor, some studies in my neighborhood, and people really were sort of angry, and Nextdoor conversations can be funny. And I just kept at it, and I would say, well, read this study or read this study. And these are, you know, solid studies. And finally, there was an EPA toxicologist who'd been reading my posts. And at first she said, just focus on chemicals. There's so much science behind the chemicals. And when I said, well, can you just look at the science? And she did look at the science, and she said, wow, there's really something here. I can't believe, you know, more people aren't concerned. And so you know, but if you go to Environmental Health Trust, they have a list of the studies. Cindy's group has a list of studies. There are so many groups working on this. It's just what we need is for regular individuals to speak out.
You know, I would echo that. And I think, you know, one of the things that you're doing today that's really important is to have these Zoom meetings. And I know that Alendri has done this, Theodora has done it, I've done it, but I think there's others. You could put together some Zoom meetings to educate, you know, your group, whatever that is. And, you know, there is a lot of science. I mean, there's even military studies. So we have a list of military studies under scientific literature. So we've, you know, listed all the different aspects. But military studies, if you look under that, you'll see that even in the 1930s, there was evidence of harm. You know, NASA in 1981, they showed there was microwave illness. So it doesn't take very long to go through the naval research, you know, all of these different research, you know, all the different military studies that have shown this harm when people who worked on radar started having all these symptoms, and there was a big concern about it. But according, you know, unfortunately, as Landry points out, the people who were in charge of those, you know, those studies, they were moved, and the research funding dried up as they found that all of this radar and non-ionizing radiation for communications in the military could now be commercialized. And that's very similar to a lot of these chemicals that are commercialized. Now they could make money off of it. So I think there's a huge problem with industry influence and a need for independent studies. But yes, there's plenty of studies out there.
And just taking it back to the home front, I think that, you know, it's more anecdotal, but what I found was when we hardwired and when we started just thinking about the blue light issue, we started sleeping better as a family. I feel like our health has improved. And so you might find some immediate benefits by taking those steps.
That was what my husband noticed, who was quite reticent to absorb all of this at first. Was like, you know what, I'm sleeping better, because we had all the cordless phone base, unaware that that's radiating all the time. And we removed that and the router and other things, and that's the first thing that we noticed, actually.
Thank you for pointing that out and bringing up sleep, because protecting our sleep space is very important. When we sleep, that is when our body does the most detoxification and healing. And so it's very important that we ensure that our sleep space is safe and secure. So eliminating your router out of your bedroom, turning off your telephones, maybe not even bringing them into the bedroom, are very important. Other recommendations from the APA include to get off of your technology at least 30 minutes before you go to sleep, because it helps your brain to unwind. We're engaged on different levels when we're plugged into our devices, and it's activating brainwave lengths that inhibit us from relaxation and good deep sleep. So I'm really grateful that you guys mentioned that. I'm really curious about first steps. So let's say you're a listener and you've gotten all this information. There might be, it's been a lot of information, really great information, but also I'm imagining if this was new to me, what would be the first step that you would recommend that I do?
Well, for me, it would be the antennas, checking out the antennas on your phone, trying to just use what's needed, trying to move routers away from your bedroom, trying to turn them off at night. Another thing I didn't mention that I've been looking into, we've been funding a lot of research and science behind flame retardant dust that's in couches and gets in our system and is very toxic. And it's also in our technological devices. And I don't know about you, but my kids eat a lot while they're on the computer, or they go from the computer to food to back and forth. So I've personally been trying to be mindful about wiping down the laptop, the computer before they get on, or making sure they rinse their hands before they eat. Just thinking of low-hanging fruit. But what would you say, Theodora and Cindy?
I would say, like you said, like get the get a corded phone set up in your house. My
They're
first
cheap.
step, yeah, turning off the Wi-Fi at night. And then when you're not using it and figuring out, like, I did not know anything about modems or routers, or I just knew we had internet. I didn't really know how did we get it really, but you actually, take the time, look at what you got, figure out what you got and what you need to get. And I think step by step, and then addressing your phone. Like, I used my cell phone all the time before this, and there's so many tips and tricks with devices, like turn the antennas off that you're not using, and then once you get this, which takes no time, then use that corded phone as much as possible, and so that you can minimize your overall use. But really learning about it, taking a little time to dig in. It is something that you have to take some time to learn about, but it's just like cooking. It's like you learning a new recipe or a new way of cooking with new ingredients. It's the same thing. And now it's like, no, I never thought I knew what I know.
Here's an easy thing that I use. So you have to be careful because there's a lot of stuff on the market in terms of shields and things that don't work. It works for me because I have this meter, so I can actually check what works, but and see what's working and what's not. But this is like, I think it's called a mobile phone pod that I bought for about $20 online, and Fax doesn't really endorse products or companies. We're not supposed to, but if anyone messages me privately, I can tell you where I got this. It's a site that a lot of their stuff I trust. It's been around sort of the longest. And basically you can put your phone in, there's 2 pockets, and one pocket acts as what's called a Faraday cage, and no signal goes in or out, and my phone doesn't work. It's just kind of essentially dead when I put it in there. I have another pouch that reduces the signal a little bit, but you could still talk through it. They're different sort of products, but you have to be careful with them. And this is one that I found for me, instead of turning my phone on and off or airplane mode on and off a lot, like if I'm in a movie or something or in the car, I'll just pop it in the pouch, and it keeps it safe too. So that's something you can do.
So one of the things I wondered, sometimes you can have it overheat if you leave it there on all the time. And I wonder if that's happened to you, Lindry. So that's one of the things you're trying to block sometimes.
Yeah.
I would suggest too that EMF analysis has a way to find, I know Theodora mentioned the Wi-Fi routers. I didn't know either. I was like, what do we do? So we have one that's called a Netgear, I think, that we found, but there's others you can have. And I think even some of the internet companies do have a way so that you can use a wire. You just wire it to it and you turn the Wi-Fi off. But sometimes it doesn't work all the time, and that's what I found too with ours. I'm not going to mention any names, but we turned it off on. We have it all wired and turned it off on the internet, but it turns back on very shortly after, every 2 weeks. So I've just sort of encased it partway in kind of a metal box, so it has an outlet for heat. But we don't get the Wi-Fi, because when we switched it, and my husband switched it, I didn't realize we had the Wi-Fi, and I'm like, well, I wonder what and I looked at my machine. I'm like, wow, where is it coming from? And found out it was the router. So I think all those are really good advice. I think, again, removing your smart meter, because a lot of people start to have symptoms because that radio frequency goes throughout every wire in your house, and you can get some unusual symptoms, especially if it's close to you. And we had a smart meter that's really close in our bedroom.
And you can just call your utility. In a lot of states, allow people to opt out. And for some states it's free. And for some you have to pay $10 a month or something. But more and more it's becoming free. And it's nice because it's providing a job for someone to actually go and read the meter. So that's,
PG&E, I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
For PG&E, just go to PG&E opt-out. If you're in that area, it's really easy. And it's $75 and then $10 a month. And after 3 years, you don't pay for it, at least where we are.
Really?
But, yeah.
And where I am, Sonic, there's a company called Sonic, and they're very familiar with people making requests for routers that can be hardwired and assisting people in setting that up. So more and more, the more people ask for this stuff, the more the stuff will appear on the market. And that's kind of what we figured out in the chemical space. Is a lot of times the government agencies aren't effective in making change, and so change comes from consumer demand. And so more and more we're hoping that these devices that our children have, Alexa, I'm trying to have a hardwired Alexa because my kid really wants that. The more that we ask for these things to be created in a way where we have options and have more safety, the more we'll see that presented through market changes. So we just need to be asking for this stuff pretty loudly and clearly. And a lot of phone companies are starting to understand and offer ways to make this happen.
Exactly. And I wanted to point out screens. So this is a screen. It's an orange screen. It's a blue light blocker that you can have. You probably can't see it, but it's just a big square that you can get, and it can fit on any different screens. They have different sizes, and these are little glasses that you can have that are blue light glasses that you can read at night. Also, just to keep in mind that with blue light, that reduces your melatonin. It can just reset your circadian rhythm. It's really not good from that standpoint, the blue light. And your lights, your fluorescent lights have it. Your TV has LED screens. Anything with an LED light, which most everything is nowadays, will have it. So some people can still have a problem with their lights on. So you can use these glasses at night if you have, LED screens. And I think it does help. For some people, they can fall asleep no matter what, but I think it's helpful.
I know that on my computer, I have an app called f.lux, f.lux, and it registers the time. And as it gets later in the day, it changes the blue screen on my computer to where it completely eliminates the blue on my computer. And that's
it's free. It's free, which is great.
correct.
So one of the only problems that I have is I think that it's pretty good, but I don't know if it really removes all of the light, and you need all of the light between 400 and 500 nanometers removed, because what you have with the blue light is not only the melatonin, but you also have oxidative effects on your retina. And that's what they're finding more and more. So I haven't looked at the studies. So some people might find that it helps with sleep, but you still have, I'm concerned. So I have my screens that I know are 400 to 500 nanometers. And I'm just, you're going to have a longer life for your eyes in terms of macular degeneration. So that's my only worry. And I haven't looked at it, but.
I just want to add France has, the French FDA has multiple reports that they put out on blue light, on wireless, on children. And unlike the US FDA and our health agencies right now, because the EPA was defunded and there's really no one doing research on this anymore, except for the National Toxicology Program. But they have entire papers on all of this. And one of their important recommendations, which is what we should be asking for as consumers, is, so maybe you're watching this and you're like, okay, I'm going to get a blue light product. Well, how do you really know it's really working? Right. There's no standard. We have no way that we're even comparing products that is standard that everyone's using. And all of these issues really have to be addressed with policy change, so that we have laws that say, okay, if you make a product, it has to meet these requirements, and we know that they're going to be protective. So I would just recommend going to seeing what France is doing. And we have a page on our website that links to a lot of those reports, by the way. But their blue light one was incredible. It's also impacting wildlife.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to zip back to this homeschool front again, if it's okay, because that's kind of on the forefront of my mind. As I think about this afternoon and what didn't get done this morning for my son. And I think that's really important. What I've read from some homeschool experts is the amount of time in general that children should be like actively doing their homeschool work is might be a lot shorter than you think. And it may be that the assignments that your children are given, because the teachers are just trying to figure this out, it may be that they take a lot longer than is developmentally appropriate for your child's age. So you might want to do a little research on what is the proper amount of time that a student is actively engaged in academic pursuit while homeschooling, because you might find, I was pretty shocked to see that I think for my 5-year-old, it was like 20 minutes to a half an hour or something. And I think for my 10-year-old, an hour to an hour and a half, or maybe an hour to 2 hours. And it sort of, it made me think that there are probably some parents like me who are having expectations that are a little too high right now as we're trauma schooling, not just homeschooling. And just making sure, again, that you're advocating for your child in this sort of strange time that we're in, this COVID time, that if what the school is asking your child to do doesn't feel developmentally appropriate, isn't working for your kid, that you feel empowered to speak up. And I'm sure that, you know, for most cases it'll be welcome, because it really is a learning process back and forth between the teachers and the parents. And I think they are looking for feedback from us on what's working and what's not working.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And on that note, I want to wrap. But before I do, is there any outstanding thoughts or things that are being called to be spoken to now from our presenters before we end our webinar?
I would just say, I think it's just important. Theodora mentioned it, Landry mentioned it, just being in your own community and talking with parents about all these concerns, doing some research and reading, maybe having a book club on some of the recommendations, and really getting like-minded people together to really put pressure on the schools to make these kind of changes, and really understand that we should be not having more technology, especially when school returns. They're saying that maybe we're going to have more of this technology, but we need to be reducing it and balancing it.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other last thoughts?
Just that you can be pro technology and pro safety, and you don't have to. It's not a dichotomy. It's not one or the other. And there's a way to have equitable access that's safe. And we've just got to figure it out. We'll get there, and we're all doing the best we can. And thanks for your time, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you all. It's been a wonderful opportunity to deepen in conversation with you about this. I know I learned a lot. I want to remind our participants that we will follow up with an email that has a link to this webinar recording. Please feel free to share it with your family, your schools, your teachers. And also we will list all of the links that were shared in the chat today. I will include those in a follow-up email to you. Thank you so much to Theodora Scarato, to Dr. Cindy Russell, to Landry Purcell, to Adrian Saslow. It has been a wonderful opportunity, and I'm deeply grateful for your time today.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
All right. Thank you.
Right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take good care.